you know, that we at the post office material. And then I began to, I joined the Philatelic Society. And then they said, well, what are you collecting? Of course, I wasn't collecting anything. I just went in as a new member. And I boldly said, I collect duck stamps. Because I had 4 or 5. And I took those with me. So that is how I started. I said, well, I collect duck stamps. And at my duck stamp.
Now, when you were a child, did you collect?
Oh, I did like all children. I sent off for these packages, you know, and got back a package of maybe sent off $2 and from a catalog advertisement. And then they'd send in the packet a bunch of stamps, you know. Then I bought a catalog, you know, or a folder, and I began to lick them, put them on. Then I learned that you don't lick stamps. Went to the Stamp Society. I learned about stamp collecting then, because the others in the stamp club, I had their little books, you know, and they said this one. They said, well, when did ducks first begin? And I didn't know, so I began to read. And from the library, our library over there had some books on stamp collecting, but they didn't have anything on ducks. And then I wrote to Washington. There was a little flyer. I wrote to duck stamp headquarters and asked them to send me material on duck stamps. And from then on, I began to seriously put my stamps, not lick anything on. And when I bought my duck stamps, I did not sign them across the face. And I always prayed that the warden wouldn't come by. But I had my pen real handy so I could sign it right quick. Now, my husband signed his, but I didn't sign mine. And then I began to find out about plate blocks. Then I began to find out about all the other color, the perforations. And then about learning from the other people what to look for in errors. I didn't know what an error was. I had to learn what an error was in other stamps. That may be look for errors in any duck stamp. But then I began to contact other people who collected duck stamps. I thought I was the only one that collected duck stamps. But there were lots of other people that collected duck stamps. And then we began to talk. Then I began to exhibit what few I had. And believe it or not, I even won an award. Of course, it was a club award. But I thought that was the greatest thing that ever was.
What was that award for?
It was for the new member.
You won an award?
It was a novice award for the novice exhibit. And so that, you know, stimulated me. Well, I could do better by getting more. So I really got into it. I guess it was close to somewhere between 55 and 60 that my whole heart and body was into duck stamps. And I just put my other little classics and things I had done to one side. But I did a lot of letter writing, did a lot of telephone calls, and I went to a lot of shows. And the first thing I looked for was duck stamp exhibits. There were not any. Genuine interest. I mean, the interest, but you got to have a little money too to go along with it. That's a terrible thing to say, but because so many people want to be collectors, and they'd like to have the good things too. But they're, you know, luck goes different people's ways, and some people don't have the financial ability to buy them. They have to use it for the more essential things. And that's a handicap, of course. To get the rarities is the finances part, and I hate that. I remember one time I exhibited at I won't call the name of the stamp club, and I overheard a couple of conversations about well, we might as well take our exhibit down. It won't look like anything next to that Mrs. Rudy's. And I heard those derogatory remarks about mine was better than theirs, that they never could win if I was ever going to enter anything. And do you know, from that day on, I never exhibited again. I thought, well, am I really taking away from the average person, which I thought I was an average person, and I think I am. I want to be, but I can't help it. If things came my way, and I did get some, I didn't exhibit in the other big time shows like in Washington, the Court of Honors and things like that, where it is expected. I'll exhibit in that, but I don't go to smaller clubs and exhibit anymore because I don't want to do that to them. And why should I negate anyone else's thrill and enthusiasm in it just because I want to be a hot shot, which is not what I want. And by doing that, I think that I am maybe encouraging them to go ahead and exhibit. Whatever you may have, exhibit it. Because it's always, excitable to someone.
Sure.
And we can't do that to other people.
Do you remember when you first began collecting?
Yes, I do. As if it were yesterday. I married in February of 1949.
Okay.
And that fall, Dan said, how about going to get me my duck stamp? And I, being a nurse, a registered nurse, I had no conception what a duck stamp was. And I said, what did you say? He said, I need a duck stamp. I said, well, what is that? And he said, well, I'm going duck hunting. I said, okay, I've never done that. I want to go too. So he said, you go to the post office and get me a duck stamp. And that was my very first meeting of a duck stamp. It was the golden eye. And I thought it was a beautiful, nice green stamp. And I said, well, if you're going, I want to go too. He said, you don't know how to hunt. And I said, but I can learn.
What about duck stamps appealed to you so much?
At the beginning, it was the beauty of them. The artwork was magnificent. I said, oh, and I want to go. Then after I began to get to be a better shot, I wanted to go duck hunting for the thrill of the duck hunting. And then I began to learn about where the ducks came from and when and how they knew that they were coming down at this time of year. I learned all about duck hunting. And then came in the conservation part of it, how they came from Canada. And so since then, I have been privileged to have Ducks Unlimited take me to Canada and see all the potholes while they were nesting, and see the ducks in their nest, and being able to pick up the eggs and to put them to the light. Have you ever done that, to see the eggs and to timetable them in the through the little channel tube? And it was then conservation came into it. Then I began to read the statistics about how much of the duck stamp went to conservation. I didn't do that at first. It was because they were pretty. Then they became more meaningful the longer I was into it. I was into it, I guess 4 or 5 years before I really caught on what it was all about. The most, I guess, thrilling, what really got me going, was having bought the #1 stamp. And Domain brought it down here to my home. And I said, I won't buy it unless I see it. And he had a 6-figure number on it, price. I said, bring it down. He brought it down. I didn't know him. He didn't know me. And I have a real close policeman friend. And I asked him, I said, I don't know this man. He's coming into my home. I said, I want you to be present. Armed, of course, but in civilian clothes. I said, I just want you to watch the deal. And I had the newspaper people here. And I said, if it's going to be, if I'm going to be rooked, I'm going to be rooked royally. And it all turned out to be that it was absolutely perfect. It was the stamp. He had the documentation. And I was thrilled to death. And of course the newspaper people were, and of course I didn't need my policeman, but Bob, was quite, at first, he didn't know, he was intimidated to think that I had a policeman there, and I said, well, I didn't know who you were. But I guess that was the greatest moment of my whole life, just get that #1 stamp, because I knew that I could go from there, because no one else had that. And I always tried to get the things that were the rarest, and to try to see to it that their writings on the back of the stamp. I wanted everything there about the writings on the back of the stamp. I wanted to know all about the gums on the back of the stamps. Some had gums, some of them did not have gums. The writings were all different. And I set them aside in their own little exhibits. And then the errors was a different collection altogether. I began to get serious because I knew then that I was way behind in calling myself a collector. And I wanted to be a good collector. And I wanted to have a good exhibit. I wanted to win the big time exhibits. And I started going and exhibiting what stamps, in what little I knew then, to the others. I went to Denver to exhibit. I've been to Washington to exhibit, Georgia, Alabama, and certainly Kentucky and Tennessee. In Washington, when I took it to Washington, and it was exhibited next to the Queen's exhibit, I thought I had arrived. And it was, you remember that, Jim?
And what year was it?
At the Washington exhibit, I have the gold medal in there. Nice big gold medal that I won for my exhibit. And it was exhibited in the Court of Honor. And the Queen's exhibit was in the Court of Honor right next to my ducks. See, she was next to me, not I next to her. And that, to me, I thought that I had really done what I wanted to achieve. And that was make the best exhibit that I could possibly make. Being a judge, it was the greatest thrill I had ever known. And to be selected, I think, Norma Opgren, I knew who she was. And I thought she was one of the greatest women ever was to have that position. And I was, quite fascinated with her, and having never met her. And I never got to have the chance when I was up there to meet, then to get that telephone call to say that this is Norma Opgren. And I thought, somebody was bugging me, one of those kind of deals. I said, yes. And she said, Jeanette, we've went through this procedure and said, we have selected you as one of our judges for this year's duck stamp contest. And then it came to me, well, maybe this really was Norma. And I said, oh, you're kidding. She said, oh, no. Can you be in Washington at such and such time? I said, yes, I can be there tomorrow if you want. And to this day, Norma and I have a great remembrance of that first conversation. And when I was there doing the judging, I was just, they don't know, but I was floating on cloud 9 the whole time. And I didn't just walk, I floated all through that. And it is a wonderful experience. And believe it or not, I have a twin sister.
You do?
And she was a judge. Also one of the hot ones, Jim. Jim's duck. So we both were judges.
Yeah.
I just wanted them in something very special because they were special. And if they were to be exhibited, and if I were to give them to the Smithsonian, and I thought about that long time, years before I even acted upon it. Because I know that without any children to pass them on to that might not have any interest to them. And I thought, well, I have had them to myself for so many years. But people don't see these rarities and all these things together.
happens.
You know, God's been good to me, and I think we all think about a legacy, and this would be what I could leave for someone else. That's what a legacy is. And I've done this and enjoyed it so much, and I hate to brag on it, but it is a fabulous collection. And I know that it is. I don't like to brag on what you do, but so I still enjoy it. And I still get a thrill every time I see one of those stamps. Gosh, you know, I just, somehow they say men make the history and the women preserve it. And this is true. If you look back in our general history, men make our history. And generally, I'm a member of the Daughters of the American Revolution, and we preserve everything, you know. And I thought, well, you know, I would like to be a history maker, too. And there are a few women that came through during my lifetime, and other, like Amelia Earhart, some of these other great people are women. And one of the first women doctors, I thought that was the greatest thing that ever was. And I was quite interested in Florence Nightingale, the first nurse, you know, supposedly. I've researched her history. It's a beautiful history. It's a pathetic history. But how nurses came about. And that's why I did my nursing school. But I wanted to be remembered somehow. And not that I'm anything special. I thought, well, everyone wants to be remembered somehow. And somehow is always their children. And with people without children, what are we going to do? We must find our way, you know, in the miles of life that we travel before the end comes. You go through the woods and you know, I look back and see if I've left a footprint. Sometimes I walk heavily. I say, now, that footprint will be there when I'm gone.